Welcome back to the Drive Home Reviews podcast, where I review the movies that I have just seen as I am driving home from the theater. And I have a feeling that this is going to be another entry into the long story short series of reviews.
Make a long story short, but to make a long story short.
So anyway, long story short.
Why do people say long story short? They're not making it short, Stan.
Because when you get right down to it, just in terms of filmmaking, there's not a lot to talk about in terms of why this movie is as good as it is. There's no magic trick, there's no secret formula, there's no code that needs to be entered. It's all pretty self-explanatory. You've got a really good script written by very talented screenwriters, a director who 100% understands the assignment and also plays to her strengths, and a cast that you can just tell is 100% here for it and are just totally engaged in the creative process of bringing this story to life. There it is. That's all it takes. I know that's like saying, going to the moon isn't that hard. All you got to do is build a rocket ship, but...
somebody once told me that making movies was easy. Yeah, you know what else is easy? Open heart surgery.
Oh, yes!
Yeah, thanks for coming, Fuad.
Oh, it's funny because open heart surgery is not easy at all.
Yeah, calm down, Fuad.
Oh.
There it is. Everything that makes this movie good is right there on the screen, and there's not really a whole lot to dig into. What there is to talk about is just what all this movie has to say and the ways in which all of those different elements I just brought up coalesce to becoming this really gripping and surprisingly emotional film. So yeah, I really dug this one, and I dug it for a lot of reasons, and some of which I'm still kind of discovering, which right there is a point in its favor, that this is a film and a presentation of ideas that is so well done that I'm still kind of discovering new aspects of it, new facets of it, the more I think about it. And, I love the Marvel movies, I love Spider-Man, but I can't say I've been thinking much about the larger ideas at play there since I originally saw it. So, take that with a grain of salt and take it as you will. So I do want to talk about this movie. But first, let's talk about what this movie is actually about. It's okay if you haven't heard of this film. This film was released, like where I'm at, it was literally out in theaters for 1 week. And then it got bumped for the next big budget summer blockbuster. It came out, it was there, and then it was gone. And I had to wait until it was available on streaming to actually sit down and watch it. So if you haven't heard of this movie, let me kind of run down the plot. However, to fully talk about that and the ideas at play, I do have to get into what could be considered spoiler territory. Even though if you watch the trailer, you're probably going to get a pretty decent idea as to what the actual invite of the title is referring to. But just for the sake of, people wanting to see something unspoiled, I am going to put up the spoiler warning before I talk about the plot.
Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. Maybe say spoiler before you give away the end of a movie, okay?
Okay, so this film is about two couples. Our primary couple, played by Seth Rogen and Olivia Wilde, who also is the director of the film. Their marriage is in the dumpster. They're both incredibly unhappy with their lives, with each other. They basically do nothing but fight, and it seems like they kind of enjoy doing nothing but fighting. They wallow in this misery that they have kind of created around themselves, which just needs a tiny spark to turn into the towering inferno. The spark of this evening, our inciting incident, is that Olivia Wilde has invited their new upstairs neighbors, played by Edward Norton and Penelope Cruz, over for dinner, which Seth Rogen already, by principle, hates everything, but hates this idea especially because he hates the fact that the couple are constantly having very loud sex upstairs and keeping him awake at night. So when Edward Norton and Penelope Cruz arrive, they are seemingly one of these couples that are just, I don't know what the proper term for them would be. Yuppie doesn't quite cover it, but you know the kind of couple that I'm talking about. One of those couples that just makes life look so easy, and they're so open and they're so free, and they speak Spanish to each other in public, which makes sense for Penelope Cruz, but with Edward Norton, it's just basically to show that he can. One of those couples that smiles, but you get this feeling that they're secretly judging you right to your face. So Seth Rogen, his character, just hates these people on principle, and you can kind of understand where he's coming from, and therefore kind of makes it his mission to just be a dick and make this evening as uncomfortable for everyone. Olivia Wilde's character, on the other hand, sees these people as these sophisticated, people living every person's dream, and she's falling all over herself in an attempt to, win them over, to win praise. Anytime they say anything even remotely praiseworthy to her, she practically bursts into tears. So there's your dynamic, but where things get, start to take a turn is when we find out, as I said, what the actual invite of the title refers to. And what we come to discover is that Edward Norton and Penelope Cruz are, I'm not sure what you would call it, I guess sex positive or whatever. Basically that they enjoy multiple partners, they swing, I guess. They take part in, I guess, what would be considered orgies, and talk about it with this very kind of casual air, which for a moment brings everybody in the party together as Olivia Wilde and Seth Rogen are asking questions, are, really curious about this lifestyle, obviously from two very different perspectives, but things take a sudden turn and get very real when it's brought to light that the entire reason Edward Norton and Penelope Cruz accepted the invitation is because they had noticed Seth Rogen and Olivia Wilde and wanted to invite them to join them on their sexcapades. And that's when shit kind of hits the fan, and, or for lack of better terminology, things get real. So that's the basic story of this film. So right away, let's just run down the list in no particular order, but right away, what really clicks for me about this movie, and if you're a long-time listener, you know that this is nothing new, but a film that always will scratch my particular itch is any film that I feel could be a play. If I watch a movie and say that could be a play, that's one of the highest compliments I can give the writing and the acting. I come from the theater, I'm trained in the theater, that's what my degrees are in, that's what I teach. So if I see a story that I'm watching and going, wow, that would be a great play, what I'm really saying is that's a play I'd love to direct. So if the first thing that kind of hits me about a film is that this could be a play, that's kind of the highest praise I can give it. And yeah, which, as it turns out, is not an accident. So this film has an odd lineage. So it is based on a Spanish film, which itself was based on a play. So this movie based on a play has been translated and Americanized, I guess, by American screenwriters, one of it which is Rashida Jones, which is really awesome. And then from what I understand, from the little bit I kind of have read about it, the process of actually making the movie was very much like it is when you are workshopping a new play, in that the actors played around with it, they added to it, they subtracted, they brought their own personalities, they brought their own moments to it, and what you end up with is a piece that feels very natural and lived in. It feels like, these feel like real couples. It's hard to ignore Olivia Wilde, Seth Rogen, Edward Norton, and Penelope Cruz are movie stars. It's very hard to ignore that. They're very recognizable. Their faces, their voices, they're very recognizable people. And yet this film, these characters feel very organic and feel very natural. And there are only a couple times I'd say certain actors look like they are acting. The rest of the time, these feel like natural interactions. The story also follows a very natural curve to it. I will say that it is a slow burn. It does take a while it took a while for me to get into it, because as much as I love plays and I love movies based on plays or movies that could be plays, it's also impossible to deny the fact that certain plays or certain formulas for plays are very tired and worn out. For instance, Olivia Wilde and Seth Rogen, as I said, are a married couple who absolutely seem to hate each other.
Utterly loathe you. You want to have a baby?
And this is very common in theater, because of course, who's going to go see a play where everything goes well and everybody gets along is, the thinking. But, I can't tell you how many plays I've read where this married couple doesn't like each other, or they once were so in love and they've fallen out of love, or this person hates their mother, or this person hates their father. There's always the person dying of something who takes on the wisdom of the ages. People have to come to terms with things. So I bring this up because it's playing very directly with those archetypes, but at the beginning of it, it's hard to ignore that they are that archetype. And for a while there, you're just kind of going, okay, I get it. Even when Penelope Cruz and Edward Norton come in, as I've said, they fit those archetypes of those kind of characters just so well. And again, I think we all know, especially in this day and age with influencers, I think people kind of get what I mean when I say, that smiling, smirking kind of perfect person or perfect couple, that those people that just love to put out there how great their life is and how perfect their spouse is. And, they do, at our wedding, we served tofu and, and they do it all with this air of ease and simplicity. Like this is such an easy thing to understand, and if you don't get it, it's because there's something deficient with you. I think of this family I see on TikTok every so often that's got like 20 fucking kids or whatever, and they did a Christmas one. The dad's like, you want to know the secret for not being lonely at Christmas? Get married and have a lot of kids. It's like, oh, well, gee, thank you. I never thought of that. Never thought. Is that all I had to do? Gee, thanks. So, it's easy to see why Seth Rogen's character especially despises these people almost on sight. But it's also really easy to see why Olivia Wilde's character is so hungry for their validation. That's another really cool thing. Okay, now that's a nice transition. Let's talk about the actual filmmaking. Just what a great job Olivia Wilde does with this film. I've seen a couple of the movies she's directed, and even if I'm not a fan of the films themselves, I do think she's a very, very skilled director, and that comes into play just so much here. First of all, again, with it being a very theatrical movie, that means there's one location, there's one apartment, which has, predefined dimensions. And she does an amazing job of using old school theater directing tricks. How close people are sitting, the distances between them, using the geography that she has to help convey the emotional distance that the characters are feeling. For instance, the characters spend a lot of time separated. But there's moments where Olivia Wilde goes off with Edward Norton and Seth Rogen goes off with Penelope Cruz, and when they're with other people, they're in much more intimate spaces. One of the best scenes in the movie, the one that feels kind of the most natural and wonderful, is when they are talking about the various sex partners and everything that Norton and Cruz have had, and they are all sitting together. They're very close together. It's the closest the characters are ever. It's the only time that all four characters are in close proximity to each other, because they are having a good time and having a fun conversation. Then when, of course, things happen and the divide is filmed, then seeing the distance between all of the characters and how it's not just between one couple, but between both. And there's a scene where they're like all in four corners of a room. So Olivia Wilde just does an amazing job of using the geography and, again, blocking the scenes like a theater director to help those distances tell the story. This is also a movie of perception and how people are perceived. As I've mentioned, Seth Rogen automatically hates his neighbors, while Olivia Wilde is automatically infatuated with them. And what's really great, both in the writing and the way it's directed, is that for a long time, Norton and Cruz really don't fit into one particular slot. You can understand why Seth Rogen's character absolutely despises these people, but you can also understand why Olivia Wilde's character is just so desperate, why she would hang them on the wall as an aspirational figure. And it's never really filmed like one point of view is wrong or one point of view is skewed. They are all that. And what the film does eventually do is reveal that, no, these are not perfect people. They're just broken in different ways. Actually, I think Penelope Cruz's character is the only one of these characters who seems very confident in who she is, in her emotional well-being. She seems the most emotionally healthy of the other three characters. When Edward Norton finally drops the persona, it's in service of showing just how far from perfect this guy really is, and we see all of his actions through a different lens, which I guess is a good way to kind of bring us into the acting. A really well-acted movie. I think, if I'm being honest, I think that the ladies actually are a bit better than the guys. I think Olivia Wilde and Penelope Cruz are really pulling the heavy lifting in terms of the acting. And I don't think that's the fault of Seth Rogen or Edward Norton. I think it's just that those guys embody the personas of those characters so well, and they play them so well, that it's hard to see them as anything. Okay, for example, all right. So I've never been a real big Seth Rogen fan. Just never really got on board with him. I just never really saw the appeal.
This is the Seth Rogen gene. It will give you the appearance of being funny even though you haven't actually done anything funny.
Hey, Doc, are we gonna be much longer? I gotta get some beers with the fellows before I go out on this date.
How charming and chubby. I'm rooting for you.
But he was part of that kind of tradition of the early 2000s of leading male characters who were supposed to be these, essentially man children. Permanent frat boys. Not quite as bad as, the jerks that were supposed to be aspirational, like, say the characters Adam Sandler played throughout most of his career, but kind of still in that vein, those smarky Star-Lord kind of characters who just have to have a fast quip for everything. And that's been so much a part of his persona for so long that it still feels like he's playing part of that persona, if that makes sense. And ditto Edward Norton. Edward Norton has long had that persona both on camera and off, of just this very kind of pompous Bertha better than you kind of guy. It worked really well for him in Death to Smoochie when he was playing that up for a joke. But here, where it's supposed to be taken seriously, he always does come off a little smarmier than I think we're supposed to. But then again, it is revealed that he is basically playing up those parts of himself because he's not comfortable with the other parts. This sounds like such a backhanded comment because while I say that, I still say they both did a really good job. They fit their characters very well. I just think that it's Olivia Wilde and Penelope Cruz who are really anchoring the story and really anchoring it with very grounded and natural performances. And it's not to say that the other two don't. Edward Norton has a great monologue in this that lays bare why he is the way he is. And Seth Rogen has these really wonderful moments of that self-deprecating humor, that he's using it to laugh, but we know, and he comes to understand that it's because he really hates himself. He really is not happy with who he is. So I don't want to make it sound like these guys are bad. I'm just saying that I think the ladies master the naturalistic aspects of the characters a bit better than their male co-stars. But all four of them are great, and they work really well together. As I said, this is a film you can tell that all of the actors involved just got it and really wanted to be there and really wanted to be a part of this and really wanted to do the very best job that they could. And it shows that dedication is there on the screen. So, and again, while I say that the movie is a slow burn, when it really gets into it, when it comes down to it, when we get to the third act and it's time for all of these emotions to be laid bare, it's really gut-wrenching. Just especially from Olivia Wilde and Seth Rogen, whose characters are coming to some pretty difficult realizations about themselves, about their relationship, about the situation they're in. And I like how the ending is not really a definitive one way or another. It's not a definitive, they're going to work this out and figure it out. And it's not a definitive, yeah, this is done and they have to move on, on their own. It doesn't really give you that answer. Don't worry, I didn't make the same mistake I made, because I said that with Girls Love Girls or Girls Like Girls. I actually made sure there was nothing in the end credits that, invalidates that. So I like that it doesn't give a neat and tidy answer to these very complex emotional problems that these characters are facing. And I like the way that Penelope Cruz's character acts as the buffer between them and isn't judgmental of them, but is laying some pretty harsh truths at their feet. Again, she seems to be the one character who doesn't seem that she's hiding anything, or that she's being somebody else, or that she's trying to put on a persona. This is who she is because she is comfortable in her own skin. And I like that she gives them some advice without it being judgmental or just, get your shit together, and also just kind of that realization of none of this is easy. Nothing you have to do from here on out is going to be easy, but you have to make a choice. So yeah, this is just a really, really well acted, well directed, well written, collaborative film that, as I said, it took a little while for me to get into it. I was kind of in and out paying attention in the early goings, but once it really picked up, it hooked me and I was there. I guess maybe that is, if I had a criticism, I guess that would be maybe part of it, is that maybe it's on too much of a slow burn, but I don't even think that's true, because I do believe that the slow burn is necessary for establishing points that are going to be important to these characters and their journey down the road. So yeah, maybe it needed to hook you a little bit quicker, but in a way, I think if it did, it would do a disservice to what the actual point of the movie was. So, there it is. That's the closest thing I can come to a criticism, a real legit criticism regarding this movie. I think this is one that should be sought out and watched. So, I think that's all I really have to say. I think there's not much more to get into. So let's wrap it up. So final grade for The Invite, it's an A. Solid A. Yeah, I really, really enjoyed this one and came away with a lot more respect for some of the people involved than I had previously had. I had greater respect for Seth Rogen as an actor. Definitely, I already kind of respected Olivia Wilde as a director, but this one really shows how good she is. Penelope Cruz has been an actor that I've never really thought much of. It's not that I didn't like her, just, never really thought a whole lot of her, but I've seen her in enough things now that I can go, wow, she is really, really good. And even Edward Norton I come away with a little bit more respect for. So I advise checking this one out. It's a good movie, and I think it's one that you could use as an argument when you talk about movies as art. So do yourself a favor and check this one out at some point. I don't think you'll regret it. Okay, so there you have it. So that's everything I need to go over. So thank you for coming along. Thanks for listening. Hope you're all doing well. And as always, drive safe. And I will see you at the movies.